Let's be honest about what we're doing to the education of our kids. We understand that there are hard choices to be made and that we might have to be part of the solution to the state budget, but let's be truthful about it so we can all have this messaging around, and here's what we can do to fix the problem. Otherwise, it's really hard to come up with some solutions if we have contradicting messages coming from both sides.
Great schools make great communities, primarily by equipping young people with the education they need to grow and succeed. But they also serve as community resources and contribute to property values. That's part of the symbiotic relationship thriving schools and communities have. And at the core of that relationship is community investment through taxes that fund school districts. That's where the relationship gets complicated. State laws and annually adjusted funding formulas, plus extra elections for supplemental tax funds, make it really difficult to understand how and why school districts are financed. And all that complexity is why Douglas County School District's Chief Financial Officer, Jana Schleusner, is our guest for this episode. As an expert who regularly goes to the state capitol to advocate for school funding on behalf of DCSD and all public schools, Jana understands this subject as well as anyone. She may be one of the comparative few district employees who's not a teacher, but she is a great educator, as you'll hear right now. Jana, thank you for making the time to talk with us about a really, really important topic here for school districts everywhere, and especially for our school district, especially this year in Colorado. There's so much going on about the funding of our school districts. I don't even know where to start. It's a big, complex thing, and I'm so glad you're here to bring your brain to our podcast. And I'm just going to be very transparent and say I'm a word guy, not a numbers guy. We just talked a little bit about me asking dumb questions, and you said there's no such thing as a dumb question. Just wait. I'll get you with some dumb questions here. No, but this is complex. It's a lot.
It is a lot. And, it's affected by property taxes, state budget, laws that have been enacted years, decades ago. And then year after year, we are fighting for funding for our kids and their education. And year after year, you think, okay, next year's going to be a little bit easier. And something else comes up that affects it in ways you just didn't anticipate. So why I say there's no dumb questions in school finances, I've been doing this for 13 years in some capacity or another. It took me 3 years for the light to really make those connections of the things that you need to connect to do your job correctly. And every year I learned something new about, I didn't know that would affect how this works. And it's a complex web, so you're going to have to keep me from going down rabbit holes of how some of this works.
It is a lot, and I'm glad you're here to bring those 13 years of, honestly, it's probably a little bit of trial and error for everybody,
It is.
like trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
So should we start at the high level? How are schools funded? That in itself is a little complex, right?
It is, and it's very different than other local governments. So most, if not all of us, are funded through local property taxes. And it's been a huge topic since COVID, when all of our property taxes started, our values of our home started skyrocketing, which affects your taxes. Huge topic. So unlike local government, most governments have a mill, and a mill is a tax rate. So a fire department will have 5 mills, which is 5% tax on your property. As your community grows and there's more houses within that community, their revenue goes up. So they have a better ability to hire more people to take care of all of those houses and all of those growing community members. School district is very different. We have what's called the School Finance Act. This is set by the legislature every year. What that means is we get a certain amount per student. Right now, we get about $11,000 per student. That kind of equalizes this funding across the state. So as we have a very wealthy tax base here, we don't get more money than Brush, Colorado, that does not have the same community and population that we do. Everyone gets $11,000 per student. Then the state says you need to tax your property owners 27 mils. That pays for about half of that 11,000 per student. State fills in the rest. So a lot of people say, well, we are a really wealthy county. It does not mean more money for the school district. As your property values go up, the state gives us less. We get the same 11,000 per student.
Wow. So that alone, there's a lot of questions there. But the first piece is, it's interesting that no matter, like you said, if we're a large county with a relatively well-to-do tax base, you're a little bit, is the word handcuffed a little bit too harsh of a word? But you're limited. You're limited, right?
Well, and it's confusing to our population because they think, well, we're wealthy. I pay a lot of taxes to the school district. You must be swimming in the money. We're not. And actually, there's two other pieces to this that make us non-competitive with some of our neighbors. So our population tends to be very conservative, small government, low taxes, just stay out of my way and do your thing. That means they tend not to approve new taxes that come our way. So we have two other major sources of revenue. One is called the mill levy override. And what that means is that the voters are authorizing our levy to be overridden by a different amount. What I like about it is it's local dollars that stay locally. So while other taxes get sent up to the Capitol and redistributed around the state, these are local dollars that stay within our community and help our kids. So what we've done over the past few decades is we've gone to our taxpayers and said, can we have $60 million of extra revenue per year? It's an ongoing revenue that comes through every year, and it's used for operational expenses. So that means salaries. It means campus security at our schools. It means increasing the ratio of counselors to students in our schools. What you typically do is you go to your voters and you poll them and say, what's important to you in our education system? And you try to match those two. We have traditionally asked for flat dollar amounts, and that is what our community has in the past tended to gravitate towards. But the value of $60 million today is very different today than it's going to be in another decade or two. So it's kind of a hard part about how we've done mill levy overrides in this county. And again, our taxpayers are very conservative with their money. And if you go to Cherry Creek, if you go to Denver, you just put some on the ballot and they go, great, I'm in, you can have more money. So the amount of money that our neighbors have because of mill levy overrides is much more than ours. The other piece of that is called a bond. So a bond is different in that it is voters approving that I can go issue debt for $400 million. So we go issue debt and we sell those bonds to investors. And that could be corporations, it could be individual investors. And we then have 30-year debt. So we have to pay off this $400 million on behalf of our taxpayers. And we do that for capital items. So it's maintenance, it's infrastructure, it's building new schools. And what we end up taxing our taxpayers is the amount that we need to pay the principal and interest every year on that debt. It's one-time expenses, and that debt tends to go down and eventually does go away unless you go back and ask for a different debt. So those are the pieces that we have and where we've just been at a disadvantage to our neighbors because our voters are not as willing to pass them as the others.
Got it. Okay, so a lot there. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's a lot. And the mill levy override, first of all, like you said, that's a piece that the state can't kind of count against us, right?
Right.
So like you mentioned, if property tax rates go up and we're pulling in more, the state just says, well, fine, we'll pay you less because we're equalizing everything across the state. So does that mean, is it possible that, we pay those taxes, it goes to the state, then the state redistributes it? So are we paying in more than we're getting back? Is that a part of it?
Yeah, in general, that's what's been another thing that's been hard with our community, or just different, I guess I should say, is that there's been a couple different ballot measures over the past several years about increasing funding for schools in general. And we can talk in a minute about all those laws that have affected the state budget side of this equation also. But our community also tends to say, we're not going to vote for those statewide initiatives to increase funding because, again, we're if not one of the most wealthiest counties in the state. So we pay the taxes that goes up north, and then that gets distributed to Denver Public Schools. And they go, we're tired of paying the taxes for someone up north. Again, we want our local taxes to stay local and help our community. And it's a tougher sell.
Sure. Yeah, I can see that. So that makes it difficult to kind of equalize things because then when we go for a mill levy override, it's like we're already paying and it's not even coming back to us. So but that's at the state level, and there's really not a lot we can do about that other than having our state representatives try to negotiate, but they're negotiating with everybody else across the state that has their interests then. So that's even more difficult then. I'm sure we'll circle back to that piece. So that's, wow, that's a lot. But it also, in a way, sort of mirrors what you see nationally, right? There are certain states that collect a lot of tax revenue. It goes to the federal government. And then there's other smaller, more like rural states that don't collect as much. And they get more of a, it's positive and negative as far as who kicks in and who's a receiver, basically, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I do think we're all in this together to some extent. And so there should be some of that. It's just everyone's limit of what that looks like is a little bit different.
Sure. Because it's one of those things. It's like, this is a system that was worked out that while it's not ideal, it's the best we could do. Because how else can you do this other than having every school district handle things themselves or every county handle things themselves? And then you have wild fluctuations.
Yeah.
And then you'll have, especially like rural schools that just will have nothing, basically, right? And the state is responsible for providing what schools are required to provide, fair and equal access to.
Yes. Yeah. So we have to accept all kids, which I love that part of public education. And it does get really hard with the rural schools. And rural schools have traditionally been underfunded to a large extent. They don't have some of it's the density of the community. So we have a lot of you just look around Castle Rock and Highlands Ranch, and we have a lot of houses to help put into that pool. When you have a lot of farmland around you and not a lot of kids, those communities tend to have a lot of land wealth, but that doesn't necessarily translate into pocketbook wealth that I can help contribute property tax funds to the school or pay for mill levy overrides or the bonds that we just talked about. So we also have efficiencies of scale. So we have one superintendent for 61,000 kids. They might have one superintendent that serves 200 kids. And they're also the CFO and the HR so you probably saw a lot of that at Elizabeth, is that these schools and the districts operate very differently. And you can wear a lot of different hats in those smaller school districts. And they need some additional funding and help to get those kids the same opportunities that our kids are lucky enough to have.
Right, exactly. So, and that's part of the state's responsibility to ensure that all students have access to a comparable level of education.
It is, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the big problem that has to be solved at the state level. Then it comes down to counties and school districts, and how do you find extra money to fund the other things that you need to do? That's where a mill levy override and bonds come in to build new schools and things like that. And so it becomes kind of a situation where school districts are fairly frequently having to go back to voters and say, hey, can you help us with this now? And be very specific, like in the mill levy overrides that we had, that was at this point 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And, there's discussions about how those are going to be needed coming up in the future. We're going to need more mill levy overrides.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the only way you can increase and keep pace, especially while you've got the bigger districts you mentioned that are more willing, their tax bases are more willing to kick in more on a mill levy override. So they're able to pay their teachers more.
Exactly.
So then you have the possibility of a brain drain. And you mentioned when I worked at Elizabeth, that was sort of the thing. It's like different sized fish in the pond. Like the small fish gets eaten by the bigger fish, gets eaten by the bigger fish.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the salary thing for teachers all through the state. The smaller districts really struggle to, when I was in Elizabeth, well, we're losing all of our teachers to Douglas County. I come here and we're losing all of our teachers. Not all of, we shouldn't say all. I'm
Yes.
exaggerating first, but there's that competition. I should say that.
Yeah.
There's competition, and wherever somebody's going to be offering a higher salary, that's where people are going to go. So it becomes sort of this like keeping up with the Joneses thing.
It really is. And when you're so close to other districts like we are, Cherry Creek is just north on 25 from us. And it's expensive to live in Douglas County also. And when your teachers can't afford to live in your community and they live a little bit further north or south, they drive by 3 other school districts on their way to work. And those school districts like Cherry Creek might pay $10,000, $15,000 more a year for that teacher. It's really hard to pass by those schools and come to Douglas County. Even though we have amazing teachers who do what they do extremely well. We're the highest test scores in the state. We have a 93% graduation rate that we're really proud of. We do amazing things, but we definitely don't pay them what they're worth.
And so that's the piece that is the constant challenge, especially for somebody in your position
It is.
How to find ways to bring the money back in, and then working with the board and the superintendent and then the public.
Yeah.
What are the ways to do this? So then we go having to make the case to the voters every few years and be very specific about it. And it's interesting, you mentioned the piece about previously it was dollar amounts. And so you're talking about now switching more to the idea of a percentage or a specific mill, right? That
Yes.
kind of lock in market rates for how much that dollar is worth then. Is that a fair way to say that?
Yeah, that's correct. So we're talking to the board right now about changing those flat dollar amounts to a fixed mill is one of our options. And that's the one that us as staff are focused on right now. So what that means is that as our community grows, that percentage that a house pays for their property taxes would stay the same. So as a house gets added next door to you, they would pay that same percentage of property taxes to the school district. So just like in any job that you've ever had, you expect to get a raise for that cost of living year after year. This is what enables us to do that. And we're able to rely less and less on the state because that budget's getting so hard. So school districts are going more to their local community and local property tax owners to go, hey, will you help this important thing of educating our kids? Because the state isn't helping us with funding now. So they're not increasing very much, or right now they're really talking about cutting a lot of education funding. So it's going to get harder over the years.
Can you remind me, in a recent board meeting, there was talk about previous mills and the amount that was, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear that number and you go, yeah, that really wouldn't go very far here in 2026 as we're recording this, right?
Yeah. So for our mill levy override, we have a flat dollar amount of $139 million that comes into the school district above and beyond that School Finance Act every year for operations. Then for our bonds, we used to be at 15 mills. We're all the way down to 5 because we either didn't ask our taxpayers or they said no when we asked for bond dollars, which really goes to maintaining these taxpayer assets called our schools. So it's really come down, and it's a hard place for us to maintain our buildings when it's only 5 mills. So it's really an education piece for our public of we're growing. We can see the houses coming in around us. But at the same time, we have an older community here, and people, like, I love where I live. I don't have kids. People's kids are moving out and going to college and living elsewhere, but they're staying in their house because we're an amazing community. Who wouldn't want to stay here? But the number of kids are going down in certain areas, but then we're growing like crazy out by Chatfield or down the Crowfoot corridor. There's spots that are growing really quickly and spots that are declining in enrollment. So the superintendent keeps saying recently that we have the right number of schools. They're all in the wrong locations. If we could pick up that school and move it over to Chatfield, we'd be amazing. And the other thing that's hard for the community to understand is that when the developers are showing you a house in a new community, they go, your school's going to be right here. And people with young kids are like, great, my kid can walk across the street. I can walk them to school. This is going to be amazing. What they don't realize is there's no money associated with that. They've set aside the land. We still have to go to our taxpayers and go, can we get some bond money? So take out some debt that you're then going to pay the principal and interest on through property taxes and our mill. And then we're going to build your school. And people go, no, the developer told me my school is going to be here. Yes, but the whole community needs to vote yes to build that school, to have money to build that school. So it just gets confusing, and developers are trying to sell, they're doing their job of selling their property and selling their land, but it doesn't translate into what does that mean to build a school, and where does that money come from, and how does it happen, and all of those pieces.
Sure. Well, and in a county as big as Douglas County, you're also counting on not just the people in that local area. Say you're in Highlands Ranch, in a fast-growing part of Highlands Ranch. You also need the voters in Parker and Castle Rock and Sedalia and Larkspur to support that as well.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a big job for the school district to explain that to everybody and say, hey, this benefits everybody.
Yeah. And we benefit from a higher educated and more thriving, ready for the workforce community. That's what we want. That's what's important to us in this county.
Exactly. Maybe this is a little bit of a sidebar here that goes to the growth and decline issue that we've had here in the school district over the last couple of years, and the process of some of those neighborhoods where we built a whole bunch of schools 20 and 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was great. They were in this neighborhood that had just tons of kids, and those schools were full of kids, and they did their job and educated those kids. And then those families saw those kids grow and go through middle school and high school and leave and go to college. And now you've got pockets of just tons of empty nesters, like you said, and they love staying in the community, but there's no place for somebody to move in now.
Yeah.
To move into that neighborhood to keep repopulating those schools. So that's why we've had to consolidate some of those. The district is keeping those buildings and going to ensure that maintenance is taken care of for those buildings, because eventually
they're going to turn one way or another.
Uh-huh. You hate to say it,
They are.
But we're all here for a certain period of time, and then that house is going up for sale.
And I remember when Highlands Ranch was truly the ranch. And boy, if somebody got invited out to something in Highlands Ranch, we'd go, wow, you're going to Highlands Ranch. And what does that house look like? And it's where the big houses were and the big ranches were. Now it is, full of houses. And it was growing so fast that we were building school after school after school. Well, now, as you said, the kids aren't there anymore. People are staying in place. But we'll have one school next. You can see the other elementary school right there. And they were built for smaller groups of kids. So, 300 kids. We're building them now for 700 kids. So we can really fluctuate with that change of population that's going to happen. And this is happening nationwide. Just a decrease of people having kids or how many kids they're having, waiting till later in life. All of those things are factoring in. So it's really hard for someone at Highlands Ranch, where they're seeing us close their neighborhood school, to go, but I'm going to give you money to build that school over there, because they don't see that same growth in their area. And it's confusing unless you show them where the population's going, where the kids are going. And just because the houses are coming up doesn't mean it's going to produce kids. And so it's a balance now where we're really having to look at our old assumptions that we used to make on how many houses translates into how many students you're going to have. That whole equation has changed. And so it's really hard, I feel, for our planning department of, now you go predict how many kids are going to be there in 10 years. It's all changed. They're not sure.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Because Gen Z, like you referenced, fewer and fewer of them are fewer are even getting married, first of all. But not that you have to be married to have kids, but there's that piece that a lot of times that comes with it, First comes love.
Then comes marriage.
Then comes so-and-so.
Baby in a baby carriage. That's true, right?
So that's not happening right now.
And the Gen Z kids are like, we can't afford to have kids. My own kids are just like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to do that because they can't afford a home and just the way the job market is. I just read something this morning talking about and interviewing like this panel of Gen Z kids that are just out of college and struggling to even find jobs. That's a whole bigger macro issue.
Yeah.
But it's affecting the entire country, that there are fewer and fewer people. We're not replacing people as fast as we used to.
Yeah.
And at the numbers, we're not at replacement rate anymore, right? We're an aging country. And Douglas County, we've talked about when starting the Gold Card. One of the things we talk about with the Gold Card program is that Douglas County is the fastest aging county in the
state. Yeah.
So you've got that too. And we can't just turn elementary schools into senior centers.
That might be an idea, right?
Just flip them there for a few decades. But so I guess that was a bit of a rabbit trail a little bit, but that's part of what this school district is facing, and lots of school districts are facing.
Yeah.
And I'll just say it from my own perspective. I'm not representing anybody else. I feel like looking at the process from my semi-external position compared to other school districts that we've seen that were like, we're ripping the Band-Aid off and we're closing this school in a couple of months and your kids next year are going to go somewhere else. This was a very well planned and community oriented process that a lot of people from our school district worked really hard to minimize the impacts and tell people way up front and walk them through this whole process, to the point that I feel like we're not seeing as much pushback here as you see in other parts of the state. So
I agree. I think we did a really good job at bringing the community with us and helping them understand the reasons why we're closing schools. And it's amazing that you don't really save as much money as you would think with closing a school. Yes, there's some overhead, but we're repurposing those schools, right? So we still have to pay the electricity. We still have to maintain them. We still have to have a custodian on site to help us maintain that building. But really the biggest argument and reason to close schools is the fewer kids you have in a school, the less opportunity they have. So think of those larger schools and how they're able to fund music and the sports and the theater. And as a society, we're so much more focused on the career and technical education and getting those opportunities to try out things. And I think about when I was in high school and everybody would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you go, I don't know, my dad's an accountant, so I guess I'm going to go be an accountant, right? There's no opportunity to go, but I like cooking. I wonder what that's going to look like. I'm interested in healthcare and helping people. Now you can actually test that out before you have to invest a ton of time and money into these pathways that you might go, yeah, I can't do blood, I can't do needles, I can't, whatever that is. There's these opportunities that we are really able to give our families and, more importantly, our kids this opportunity to go, here's some things to think about that you might want to be when you adult. Try them out. And it's amazing. And so when you have a bunch of small schools, it really limits that opportunity, just funding-wise, that you're able to do and manage with a smaller number of kids. But if you get a school of 700, suddenly I have enough kids that might have an interest in culinary that I can now have a culinary. I can have the cosmetology school that we're adding on to Douglas County High School, or the automotive at Highlands Ranch. Like, we're doing cool things with our kids, and you have to have enough so you have the interest where it pays off to have a teacher come teach 10 kids instead of 2 kids.
Exactly. And that's the piece that, from your perspective, from seeing the budget side of things, every school gets allocated a certain amount of money based on that per pupil funding piece and all the other pieces that go into it. But a smaller school with a smaller budget, then they potentially have to split time. And we talked about this with the elementary schools. they couldn't afford to have a full-time music teacher and art teacher.
Yeah.
So those teachers were splitting time amongst multiple schools. That's harder to hire for because really who wants to do that as much as being locked into one school? It's harder on the kids because the teacher doesn't get to know them as much.
Yeah.
And the teacher doesn't get to build the relationships with the other staff and figure out ways to, here Johnny needs some extra help talking to the classroom teacher and I'm going to try to help out in art class. And you just have fewer and fewer of those opportunities because the budget just doesn't go that far, doesn't stretch that far, right?
Yeah, and think about our example with the rural schools versus the larger schools. It's the same microcosmos in that school side of each school is its own little community. And the more you can get that community to come together and focus on their needs and what their community is wanting, the better. And when you have that music teacher that also has to be the health teacher and the nurse and answer phones, like who knows how many hats these people are wearing within that small school. It's hard. And like if I had to be the HR director also, I don't know how to do that. This is what I'm good at. This is what I should be doing. But if you can't afford a full-time CFO, you either have to find someone who's willing to do that on a part-time basis, or you have to find other jobs for me to do that I'm not going to be as good at.
Right, exactly. So it becomes a difficulty just with numbers and people and how those go together.
Yeah.
So maybe this is a little bit of a transition then to the state budget issues.
Yeah.
Because trying to figure that out, last year, 2025, I should say, who knows when people will listen to this necessarily. This is being recorded in spring of... Like literally, what is it? The first day of spring? I think?
It is
2026.
Yes.
Okay, so as we're recording this, spring of 2026, going back to last year, 2025, the state overhauled how school districts are funded.
Yes.
And already the very next year, they're having to come back and go, oh, we need to do some more adjusting. So I know this is a little bit of a time-sensitive issue, but is there a way to pull some of that out and not make this so by tomorrow it's already old news or something? But just to talk about what the state funding changes have meant and what they could mean going forward.
Yeah, let's take a step back let's go back several decades. So Colorado is a little bit unique in its laws and how all of this has come together into what we see today. So Colorado is somewhat unique in that we have to have a balanced budget. It's hard to balance a budget. Like we need to have our federal government to figure out how to have a balanced budget, right? So couple things came into play. If you look at the state budget in 2008, there's a really cool graph that you can find online that shows the spending elements of the state budget. State education was by far the top item that they focused on. Then Obamacare comes into play. It really changes all the Medicaid rules. Like it or not, I don't care. It just changed the rules. So now the state has to invest more and more of that balanced budget into healthcare. So you can watch education flip to number 2. Higher education is we're the 3 largest line items. There's a bunch, but they're all a lot smaller. We're the 3 largest. And we continue to be a distant second to healthcare. So healthcare is just taking over that budget. And that's a lot of the conversation that you hear around Medicaid and how expensive it is and how we're having a hard time controlling that. So then in 1992, we passed Tabor. What Tabor says is it wants to limit the growth of government. So it limits government growth by population and inflation, and it requires a vote of the people to pass any funding measures, which I personally agree with. I think you need to be able to sell your public and your communities on the funds that you want to collect from them.
Sure.
So that's one piece of it. Then we have the Gallagher Amendment. This was actually passed a decade earlier in 1982. And I'll tell you how these two interact and how it created some of the problems that we have today. So what Gallagher did is so this was the 80s. Residential property values were increasing, kind of like we saw in 2000 or 2020, right? So they were trying to figure out a way to control the growth of property taxes for residential property tax owners. So what Gallagher said was non-residential property taxes always has to be higher than residential. And in fact, it set the percentage. So it said 55% has to come from non-residential and 45% from residential. No reason behind it. It's just what it was at the time. So it's just this random 55-45 split between commercial and residential. So then as residential values go up, you have to find a way to maintain this 55-45 split. You can't raise an assessment rate because you can't raise taxes without a vote of the people. Who's going to vote for their property tax to increase with no real benefit that you can sell? So the only way to keep that percentage is to decrease the assessment rate on residential. So backing up just a second of what is an assessment rate, right? So average home, $700,000 in Douglas County. That is the value of your home. When I say it's an assessment rate, there's a 7% assessment rate on your property. That means you're paying taxes on 7% of that value. So you have a $700,000 value of your home. You pay taxes on $50,000. That's what your taxes get applied to. So that's how they managed that 55-45 split for Gallagher. Now, Gallagher was repealed in 2020. But what it did while it was in place is we had commercial assessment rate at 29%, and it's still pretty high. I think it's at 27% now. It's going to go down to 26%. But residential was at 21% when Gallagher started. Because we had to keep decreasing that rate, it got to a low of 7.15%. So where you used to pay taxes on 21% value of your home, it went down to 7%. So over the years, whether we realize it or not, we're paying less taxes on our home because of Gallagher. Also, since if you remember way back when we started this podcast, schools are funded by a mix of local and state money. So as we pay less taxes on our home, which we're very residential here in Douglas County, that means less local money is going to pay for that $11,000 per student. So the state share is increasing. And in fact, it went from the state share covering 46% of school funding to 66%. So they're covering, it's one pie, and the state share piece of that pie just keeps going up. Well, we have to have a balanced budget. We can't increase taxes without voters. So you really have to make choices and priorities within that budget. So then in 2020, all of our property tax or our values of our home shot up because Gallagher was repealed. And that was our stopgap to create these big fluctuations in residential property tax. So if you remember, there was a ton of conversation around property taxes. So we had Proposition HH, which tried to reduce that assessment rate and increase Tabor caps to keep funding for schools a little bit whole. It failed really bad. So 59% of our population said, nope, we're out. So then the governor called a 2023 special session. We keep having these special sessions now. And he said, we're going to do HH anyways. I know the voters said no, but we're going to do it anyways. So really, he did it for 1 year only. And he said, along with this, though, we're going to create this property tax commission. So this is 17 stakeholders that had lots of recommendations that came out. So they looked at how other states do taxes, how to potentially cap some of these things. And what resulted from that was what we called Proposition 108 and Proposition 50. And both of these were supposed to be on the ballot in 2023. And there were contradicting things between these two propositions. And so if they both pass, and you're going to go, well, which one do I follow? Because they're different. And there was no saying that they weren't both going to pass. So really what they ended up doing with these propositions is the people that were proposing them used it to put pressure on the government to say, but you need to find a way to fix this. They were eventually pulled before it went to the voters, but it was a really good tool to go, you figure it out or we're going to figure it out for you. So now there's a new law that is just in place that actually decouples local property taxes from school district taxes. So this is the first year that you see two different assessment rates on your property tax bill, one for local government and one for schools. And we did that to kind of try to protect funding for education, which should be the number one priority of a state. So what that does is it now says if the growth statewide is under 5% growth in residential only, then your assessment rate is 7.05. But if it grows more than 5%, we're going to lower that assessment rate to 6.95. So it gives a little bit of that balance to say if property taxes go up significantly, we're going to give you a little bit of a break and make sure that we're not giving this big windfall to local government, which, again, doesn't necessarily happen for schools. It happens more for other local government entities because they have those fixed mills. But it was the state's attempt to kind of balance these things. So we have all of these things in play that have put a lot of pressure on that state budget and really has limited how much government's willing or can grow. We also had all this COVID money that came in during 2020. And where we used our COVID money to pay for one-time things, the state developed new programs. So this is where full-day kindergarten came from. This is where preschool came from. They used COVID dollars. Well, guess what? COVID dollars went away. And now we have these ongoing programs that we used one-time funding. And we go, gosh, we don't want to cut programs, but we have no money. So there's the past 2 years, there's just been this push and pull of no one's willing to pull back programs that are important to them, yet we can't fund the basic operations of a school district or healthcare, or there's just all these pressures. And I feel for that joint budget committee because they're in tears at their committee meetings trying to cut now $1.5 billion out of a state budget, which is a lot of money no matter who you are. Right. We're a $1 billion organization. That's cutting the whole school district, right? So they're having to make some really tough choices, which I don't think we can come out of this unscathed. Last year, we were really lucky. I wouldn't say luck, actually. We fought really hard at the Capitol to protect funding for our kids. And we came out really well. I don't think we're going to come out as well this year, and this is going to be a continued fight for the next 5 years.
It just seems like there's nowhere to turn.
Right.
Between the laws and the way things are set up and even external pressures like the Medicare side of things.
And do I take away someone's health care or beds at a recovery facility or do I cut back on educating our kids, or do I pull back from them being able to further their education in higher ed, or it's a bunch of hard choices.
Sure.
But I'm fighting for our kids.
That's what we're here for. And
right.
Wow.
Yeah.
So does that end up being something where and I'm just pulling something out of just thin air on this, but do things farther down that list, you talked about the big three.
Yeah.
Things farther down the list end up being the things that get cut more than, like roads and bridges and things like that. But even that is not going to come up with $1.5 billion.
You're not getting the bang for your buck.
Right.
So they tend to go to some of these higher line items because if they cut 5% out of education, they're getting a lot more money than they are out of transportation. So what happened back in 2010 was the first time we kind of had some budget pressures on schools. What happened in 2010 is they introduced this thing called the negative factor. The lobbyists at that time actually lobbied pretty hard to rename it called the budget stabilization factor because we wanted to call it the BS factor. And it's just fun to say, right? So we call it the BS factor. And what it did we have a formula that each school gets funded by. So all of our per pupil amounts is just slightly different based on our population, where we're located, if you're rural, if you're urban, all the cost of living, if it's high or low, all of those factor in some way. So they would run us through the formula and they'd go, okay, schools are going to cost us $600 million. We don't have $600 million. So we're going to cut 10% off the bottom. So for over a decade, we all dealt with the BS factor, and it really cut education. So last year, as you talked about, we actually fought against the new formula for schools because while it put more funding into school districts, the proportionality of how much funding each district got, we didn't think was the right proportion. So the old formula was multiplicative. So it multiplied across. It said this many kids times this much per kid times cost of living times personnel factor so it multiplied across. Now they took that formula and said, we're going to instead add things down. So it really changes the math. Whether you multiply or you add, it changes the math. Mm-hmm. So they put kid factors first. So they said, okay, you get a base amount per student. Plus, you're going to get a little bit more for each English language learner. Plus, you're going to get a little bit more for each at-risk student, which are the kids that qualify for free and reduced lunch, basically. Plus, you're going to get a little bit more for special education. And then they put some of that cost of living and things at the bottom of the formula. So it's really student-focused, which sounds amazing. Mm-hmm. But what happens is this formula being fully implemented gives Douglas County School District a couple million more than the old formula. But our neighbors, like Denver, they already get 1,000 more per kid. They're going to get another 1,000 more per kid. So it really, how much more does it take to educate certain types of kids? And how much more should we be funding one school versus another school? And it did really help our rural schools, which they needed this extra funding. They get a lot more funding, and it's going to be great for them. But we're still worried about that proportionality of how much we're going to get versus our neighbors. Our costs are all teachers, and we're all competing for those same teachers, like we talked about. But our big argument a couple years ago was we can't afford it. Guess what? We can't afford it.
Right.
And so that first year implementation was going to be implemented so it all costs the state more. So they were going to slowly implement this. It was supposed to be at 18% year one. We did 15% this year. This was the first year that we got 15% of that new formula. Next year, it's supposed to be at 30%. I think we're frozen now. So the new state forecast just came out, and if they abide by the rules that we wrote into law, it should be frozen now. So we're going to be stuck at this 15% of a new formula. My guess is the next decade. I don't know when they're going to have the money to fully implement this formula. So I do think we got to a reasonable compromise on this formula. It's still not my favorite. I still don't think it really does what it needs to do for education. But even while we're cutting education, as we were looking at the new formula, the state funded 2 adequacy studies. And so that adequacy study said, how much should we be spending to educate our kids properly? And those showed that we're underfunding education by $3 to $4 billion at a time when we're looking to cut education again. When we get to 10 years down the road, when this starts loosening up 5-10 years down the road, that $4 billion is going to be what, $5 billion? I don't know, but it's not going to stay at $4 billion, and we're going to start cutting education. Now, what does that look like?
Right.
Yeah.
That it becomes like the reverse of compound interest or something. Right?
Yeah.
Holy cow. And that actually led to something I wondered about as we were just kind of talking just generally about this discussion. And I've seen this for years and years and years. There's different lists and people that keep track of things different ways. But I feel like I see a lot of this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like Colorado is usually in the bottom half of the United States.
Yeah.
You know, somewhere close to the middle, but still below that midpoint. in student funding for schools and has been for a long time.
Yeah, we're pretty close to the bottom, where I wish we were closer to the middle. We're closer to the bottom of how much we invest in our kids. So there's all kinds of different ways to calculate how much, whether it's the funding side, the revenue, or how much we spend per student. There's all kinds of different ways to look at it. But no matter how you look at it, we're not valuing education as much as some of the other states. And it's our kids that suffer for that.
Sure. Yeah. Because that becomes a competitiveness factor then
Absolutely does.
for them in their futures. And how well are we preparing them going forward?
And recruiting teachers to come in and teach our kids. Like, there's some amazing teachers out there that I want to bring in here and have in front of our kids. We can't afford them. They can go, to a neighboring state and make significantly more money and live a much better life than they can here. They can't afford a house here or rent. All those things are pretty expensive here in Colorado. So,
right. What can be done about that?
It's a complex problem that I think doesn't have an easy solution, or somebody probably would have started finding it by now. With all the laws that I went through, which I know is a lot of boring law, numbers and percentages, I get it, but it's really important of why we are where we are. And I've grown up a conservative. It's in the blood when you're an accountant, right? You tend to be fiscally conservative and tight on budgets and thoughtful about where you're spending your money. And I have this love-hate relationship with Tabor, which I think maybe a lot of the community does. I really believe you need to sell your community on tax increases, and is this what you want? You need to vote for this. I'm not a believer in big government. I think big government has never solved any problems. But at the same time, we've constricted that revenue and that growth so much that when inflation is outpacing the cost of goods that you're buying on a day-to-day basis, they're different, right? Inflation is calculated a little bit different than the rent that you're paying, or there's different pieces of that puzzle. And if they're not increasing at the same rate, or you have Medicaid that's increasing at 8% where inflation's at 4%, these things get out of balance. And it gets really hard. We are handcuffing our legislators to fix the problem. We're not able to have rainy day funds because we have to give that money back to our taxpayers, which again, I like philosophically, but it makes it really hard when you get into these tougher, shrinking economies, or inflation that's going really fast, or these competing priorities, or a changing demographic that changes the inflow of taxes. All these pieces make it so hard to fix the problem. And I don't know that there's an easy solution. It's not that we can just keep revenue or increase that revenue. You have to start making tough decisions, which is really what the creators of Tabor intended. I just don't know if it's doing all the good things that we hoped it would with restricting government.
I think about, was it 2-3 years ago, we all got refund checks from Tabor, thanks to Tabor. And then I think last year it was part of our state income tax. It was just a deduction there. So the state can't hold on to this for like a rainy day fund, or just to be able to say, we know things are going to fluctuate. The state can't hang on to that knowing that's coming, has to, by law, give that back.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it can't, in a comparable way, raise that kind of money quickly, because it has to go and ask, and rightfully so, go and ask for that extra money, via some sort of a tax increase from voters. So yeah, there's a piece of that handcuffed part that is not equitable, I guess.
Yeah, and when you have the other factor of COVID in the middle of it, where they're getting this influx of money, and really when you look at a politician, they have short-term view. They are looking to that next election. They're not looking for 10, 20 years down the road. They're looking for the next election cycle. So that makes it really hard for them to make good decisions sometimes, because they want to, what can I sell to the voters at the next election, not what's going to set us up for success in the future years that other politicians can use to their advantage. So they're taking this money and they're doing all kinds of amazing programs, and they're saying, I have opened this facility. I am fixing the homeless problem. I'm fixing drug addiction. Like, they have all these great talking points that they're investing all this money in. We've seen that the money doesn't always solve the problem. Like, throwing money at homeless does not solve the housing problem. We've seen that in Denver. So when you have this complexity of this huge influx of money, now people aren't willing to go the other direction and go, okay, that didn't work. How do I sell that I'm going to cut back this funding for whatever heartstrings I was pulling on over here? Don't care if it was working or not. It's all in the messaging. And so how do I sell it to the vote? And we're in a election year now. All these legislators are going to be going up for election in November. When they're making these budget decisions this year, it's about what's going to get them elected in November. That's what it's about.
Right. And it's like my daughter says, that's a future me problem. Just kick the can down the road a little bit. Let's worry about getting reelected.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, solutions are very short term and very minimized when it comes to the big picture. And
it's been interesting to watch how that's affecting school finances here. So where we used to have this negative factor, the BS factor, and it cut funding. When the governor, when was it? 3 years ago now, was able to get rid of this budget stabilization factor, his message was, look, we are fully funding schools. As I just said, we have this adequacy study that shows we are underfunding schools by $3 to $4 billion as a state. What he means is we are fully funding education in accordance with the formula that the state has written, which is not adequate funding.
Right.
It's just fully funding it according to a formula that was developed back in, I think that was 1992 also, way back in the 90s. Now we're to a point where we have budget problems again, and we're trying to implement this new formula that's costing us more money. Well, no one wants to go to elections in November with the message that I cut education. But there's this huge budget problem that to solve the $1.5 billion that we have to cut out of the budget without touching education is going to be hard. So now what we have happening, last year, the governor was talking about, with declining enrollment, if you have declining enrollment, you can average 5 years of your student count. What that does is it creates a softer landing for school districts. So when I lose 10 kids in the district, we have 90 schools. What am I going to cut? Like, I can't get rid of a second grade teacher. So it takes time to right size as you have declining enrollment. So the state allows us to have 5-year averaging, which is student count times 11,000 per student. So it does affect your funding. Well, last year, the governor's message was, we're funding these phantom kids. We need to stop. So then they were trying to reduce the number of years that we could average how many kids we have in our school district. And it went from 5 years to 4 years. It might go to 3 years next year. But he wanted to go to 0 last year. That's a huge hit. It's really hard to right size, especially in smaller rural districts of, I have 1 or 2 schools. What am I going to close?
Right.
Who am I going to get rid of? So we fought really hard against that messaging last year around averaging. This year, they were trying to reclassify a different type of tax to count as local share to reduce state funding. So they're trying to find a way to cut education and still be able to say, I fully fund education. So they're messing with the formula to go, nope, fully funded. But we're not. We're messing with components of that formula that reduce funding for schools and makes it really hard for us to go to our voters and go, hey, voters, we need some new local money to help pay for education of your kids. Nope, the governor said you're fully funded. You don't need my money. So it's this really hard dynamic that's happening now. And as I go to the Capitol and talk to newspapers or 9 News or whoever it might be, whoever will listen to me, My message keeps being, if you're going to cut education, we need to do it truthfully, honestly, and transparently. Quit messing with the formula and hiding it so you can get reelected in November. Let's be honest about what we're doing to the education of our kids. We understand that there are hard choices to be made and that we might have to be part of the solution to the state budget, but let's be truthful about it. So we can all have this messaging around, and here's what we can do to fix the problem. Otherwise, it's really hard to come up with some solutions if we have contradicting messages coming from both sides.
If you're changing the definition
Yeah.
and then saying, no, if we meet the definition of it, well, it was different last year this time.
It's a great way to put that.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know how anybody does any of this stuff without completely pulling out their hair.
I know. This is why it takes 13 years to figure out what the heck we're talking about, right?
Wow. First, you've been extremely generous with your time explaining all of this because it is complex. So thank you, first of all, for explaining this.
Of course.
I did want to I don't know how much more we need to cover. I mean, we could probably go on and on because it gets more and more nuanced the deeper you go. But you touched on the idea of transparency. Maybe we can end with this, because when it comes down to whenever our school district goes to the voters and says, here's our issue, and we would like you to consider helping us out a little bit more with mill levy override, a bond, et cetera. And we've, in the past couple of years, passed a mill levy override and a bond. Can we talk a little bit about the transparency part of that so that people can feel good about, okay, you asked for this, we approved it. What are you doing to show us what you did to justify this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we've done a really good job educating our community on how school funding works and the complexities of it. But again, I live in this day in and day out, so it is a difficult topic. But any group that will listen to us talk, I don't care if it's 5 people or 100 people, we're there talking about school finance and how the state budget has affected school finance over the years, how we need the help of our local community to help with our kids locally and help with their education. And we do a lot with a little. It's an amazing district. We're efficient. We don't have a lot of overhead. We don't have a lot of administrative staff. We do a lot of amazing things with a few people. And we're really wanting to get in front of our community and say, what's important to you? What do you expect from us? Which is how we came up with the Legacy Campus, where we have current technical education happening and concurrent enrollment, where we're helping to pay for some of those college credits for when you go to college, because college is really expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're trying to get ahead of it on the front side to educate our community on what we're asking them for on the ballot. And then when it comes to the other side, we have a lot of things on our website to go, here's exactly where we're spending the money and here's how it works. We also have some really amazing volunteer opportunities. So we have board committees, which are volunteers within our community. We have Fiscal Oversight Committee and the Mill Bond Oversight Committee, which are 2 of the committees that I help with from a staff perspective. And I'll say our Fiscal Oversight Committee that helps me look at budgets or site-based budget allocations, so many things that they look at. They review some of my internal controls to make sure that we have the right safety nets in place for our money and how we're managing it at the district. They're the most amazing group of community financial experts. Outside view, outside perspectives, all have their own expertise, whether it's banking or benefits or whatever that might be. They help look at what decisions we are making as a finance department to make sure we are being responsible to taxpayers. And then the Mill Bond Oversight Committee, which was just started in 2018 when we passed that mill and bond. This group looks at the ballot language and says, what did you ask your taxpayers? They look at materials of what we took out to our community and tried to sell them on, here's what we're going to do with the money. And I have to show them at 4 meetings a year, here's exactly where we're spending that money. Do you agree that this complies with the language? And they will give me feedback or tell me what other reports they would like to look at. And they are active and they take that job seriously. And so we really do have that financial community buy-in and community oversight of independent people that I have no relationship to and they have no loyalty to me. They're looking at my work and making sure that I'm doing what we promised the community we would do.
And I've sat in a couple of those meetings, and they will ask hard questions.
They do.
They're nice and polite about it, but they try to hold your and everybody else's feet to the fire and make sure that we're fulfilling what we said we do. And it's really impressive to see that there's that kind of community interest and some folks that are really care enough to make sure that things are being done well and done right. So,
yeah, they don't let me skate by with vague information. They want to see it.
And the amount of documentation that your team puts together is astounding to see.
Yeah, I have an amazing team behind me, so
it's great.
Love having them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll put in a little other plug for something that our team helped with. Was we've got an entire website just for tracking the 2024 bond and all the work that's being done on that. And the work is being spread out over 4 years, and we've got to get certain pieces and parts in place. And a lot of work takes place over summers when students aren't in buildings and things like that. So you're going to see a lot more going on that website very soon.
And it's a beautiful website. It is so well done. Yeah, so thanks for your help on that.
People that put that together, and if people have questions about that, they can come to us and we'll help find the answers to their questions if they need more on that. So
absolutely.
This has been eye-opening. My brain hurts a little bit right now, but thank you so much for helping to explain this to folks. We just wanted to kind of put this out there and show kind of the hurdles that school districts have when it comes to all the different pieces and parts that go into funding our schools. So thank you for explaining that so well and helping us out with that.
Thanks for the time. It's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening to our DCSD Notebook Deep Dive on School Financing with CFO Jana Schleusner. As you heard near the end of our conversation, DCSD has a number of ways it provides transparency about how funds are spent. You can check out our show notes for links to the various independent citizen committees that oversee district finances, including tax funds provided through mill levy overrides and bond elections. You can also check out the special website that was set up to share progress on the use of bond funds provided through voter support in 2024. If you find DCSD Notebook and our Parent University episodes helpful, please make sure to tell someone how they can find the podcast on every major platform that's out there. We're here to help our community understand how and why DCSD is the top performing school district in the Denver metro area, and how we continually seek to improve for the sake of all students.